Court of Justice has come to a decision about the application of the reduced rate in Finland, which illustrates the rules on the rates of VAT that are required by the directive. Articles 96 and 97 require member states to have a single standard rate of VAT, which must not be less than 15%. In most countries it's quite a bit more than that. The main significance is that there has to be only one. Some politicians and commentators regularly suggest that there should be extra VAT on this thing or that thing, whether for health reasons or to tax luxuries, but it wouldn't be allowed under the directive. Combine that with the rule that exemption is regarded as an exception to the general rules of VAT that has to be strictly construed and applied, and you're left with the principle that most transactions must be subjected to the single standard rate. However, Article 98 allows member states to incorporate in their national law one or two lower rates of VAT which can be applied to specific things. The lowest rate can't be less than 5%, although the articles after 98 and elsewhere in the directive give some transitional savings for member states which had even lower reduced rates when the sixth directive came into force. For example, the UK has a zero rate on some supplies. The supply is regarded as taxable, so all the related input tax can be recovered, but there's no output tax at all to charge to the customer. There is a specific rule in Article 98 that lower rates are not to be applied to electronically supplied services, so those must be standard rated. There are ongoing infringement proceedings brought by the Commission against France and Luxembourg for allowing the lower rate on downloaded books. There's then a list in Annex III of the Principal VAT Directive of goods and services which can be given a lower rate by the member state. It's the detail of this list that was considered in the recent case by the Court of Justice. There are also some important comments in the preamble to the directive about the use of reduced rates. They are mainly retained for social and transitional reasons. They are areas where traditionally some countries have provided relief for the less well-off by not charging sales taxes, and stepping up to the pure theoretical advantages of a single VAT rate is thought to be too harsh. Some of the items in the list are intended to tackle the problem of unemployment. Those member states wishing to do so should be allowed to experiment with the operation and impact in terms of job creation of a reduction in the VAT rate applicable to labour-intensive services. That reduction is also likely to reduce the incentive for the businesses concerned to join or remain in the hidden economy, the sort of cash business that doesn't account for VAT at all. So the Commission is supposed to monitor the effect of reduced rates and make reports, with a view possibly to changing the system in general or changing the list in particular at some point. I won't describe absolutely everything in Annex III, but here are some of the items, starting with several that are intended to give relief to poorer people for the necessities of life, such as food, water, drugs and medical appliances, and passenger transport. We then go on to some things which are about the quality of life rather than necessity, books and cultural services, including admission to shows, theatres, circuses, fairs, amusement parks, concerts, museums, zoos, cinemas and exhibitions, and the supply of services by writers, composers and performing artists, or of the royalties due to them. The provision, construction, renovation and alteration of housing is on the list, but with a condition. It must be there as part of a social policy. That is, it's explicitly to enable poorer people to afford accommodation. Holiday accommodation is a different matter, and then the list becomes more varied with sporting services and street cleaning, and then the short list that was added when member states were given the opportunity to encourage employment by allowing the reduced rate to various labour-intensive activities, bicycle repairs and maintenance, as well as repairing shoes, clothes and household items, domestic care services such as home help and care of the young, elderly, sick or disabled, and lastly, hairdressing. The recent case is K.OI, case C219 of 13. It's about the inclusion of books in the Annex III list. In the original version in the 6th directive, it would have been reasonably clear what was covered by the word book. It would have been something printed on paper. There are quite a few VAT rules which seem to be locked in the 1970s when they were first written, and it gets increasingly hard to apply them to an economy that has changed completely, in particular in relation to the Internet. But in this area, there was a small amendment to update the rules in 2009. The expression books was expanded to say books on all physical means of support. Finland continued to charge lower-rated VAT on printed books and standard-rated VAT on all electronic books, including those available by downloading, which aren't on physical means of support, and also those supplied on CD-ROM or memory stick. A company argued that the Finnish law should be amended to extend the lower rate in line with Annex III, and questions were referred to the Court of Justice. The court ruled that Annex III is permissive rather than mandatory. it's acceptable for member states to apply the lower rates to some of the things listed and not to others. That applies not just to separate items on the list, such as food and hairdressing, but also within a single category, such as books. So, in principle, it didn't contravene the directive for Finland to charge the lower rate on printed books and the standard rate on electronic books. However, this is an area where the law doesn't explicitly require different treatment for similar items, which means that it's subject to the principle of fiscal neutrality. Similar goods or services which compete with each other should be given the same VAT treatment. The court referred to its earlier decision in Rank Group plc on gambling supplies. To determine whether goods or services are similar, account must be taken primarily of the point of view of a typical consumer. Goods or services are similar where they have similar characteristics and meet the same needs from the point of view of consumers, the test being whether their use is comparable, and where the differences between them don't have a significant influence on the decision of the average consumer to use one or the other of those goods or services. It would be for the national court to determine whether the different means of support would be regarded by the average consumer as similar in a particular country. It will be necessary to consider whether the support medium has a significant influence on whether the consumer chooses a particular way of buying the book, in which case the principle of fiscal neutrality will not be engaged. Or, if the only thing that matters is the content, the selective application of a reduced rate of VAT would not be justified.